Nothing quite like being overhyped before you get on stage. I really appreciate that, David, so thank you. And thanks to the rest of the Alert Logic team for inviting me to speak to you today. I want to give you a quick update on the AWS business, reflect a little bit on where we're at in terms of adoption. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the characteristics of the AWS cloud and why that leads to AWS being adopted, why it leads to AWS being used extensively in security-critical use cases. So AWS today is a broadly adopted platform. We have millions of customers using AWS over the course of any 30-day period. We passed the 1 million active customer mark in November 2015, so we're well ahead of that today. And that early adoption, actually going back before 2015, say in the pre-2011 period, most of that adoption was among startup companies that were building brand new technology-enabled products on the AWS platform. Post-2012, things have started to change quite a lot, and I'm betting that most of the people in this room come from organizations that have got more than 5 years of history and more than a couple of hundred employees. So you're more characteristic of the majority of AWS users today coming from organizations that are more well-established. We often get asked why we show these reference slides. One of the reasons we show them is because if you are trying to overcome resistance within your organizations to using AWS as a platform to build new applications and to transform the way in which you do IT, one of the most powerful tools that you can use for that, one of the best levers that you can use for that, is to talk about and surface usage of AWS by other similar organizations that might be at similar scale and that might face similar challenges to you. And you can find a case study about every single one of the customers represented on this slide on the AWS case studies website. So take a look at that if you're encountering resistance, if you're still meeting skeptics that don't believe that AWS is a safe, secure, reliable, low-cost place to run applications and services. Use one of these brands as a lever to help convince those skeptics, but that AWS does have those characteristics. The other area of interesting usage, very interesting usage in my view, is the use of the AWS cloud to modernize and transform the process of delivering software and of delivering software services. Betting a few people in this room are old enough to remember putting CDs or DVDs into drives to install software. Anyone remember that? Yeah. Just remind you that that used to be the normal way that we did things. You know, you would buy software and you would get a physical product. It's pretty old school now, right? But that used to be how we did things. Today, the landscape for accessing software features is completely different to that. There's pretty much no physical distribution of media. And in fact, an increasing amount of the software that we use, we don't actually install anywhere ourselves. We don't own. We're subscribing to features that are delivered to us remotely from these subscription-based software services. So there's been a complete change in the way in which we access software technology of all types. And you'll find that if you work in an organization whose primary area of business is creating software IP, that AWS is a great place to modernize your business model. It's a great place to run large-scale software as a service platforms in the way that Adobe and others do. But it's also a great channel that you can use to access customers. We've got millions of customers that are running on the AWS platform today. We've got a service category called AWS Marketplace with over 3,800 different software products in it that you can acquire and pay for using your regular AWS billing mechanism. So if you do need software to solve a problem, I'd say take a look at that as an acquisition model. And if you produce software, take a look at that as a channel for accessing your customers. The other external proof point which is important to enterprises is analyst perspectives on the cloud. And AWS holds a difficult to acquire position right up here in the top right. There's a lot of effort at Amazon goes into maintaining that leadership position in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for infrastructure as a service worldwide. And I don't know how many of these quadrants you've looked at, but one of the things that's very unusual about this is the position that we hold up there, quite so far out on the right-hand axis. It's a very unusual location to be in. I looked at one of these quadrants recently for on-premises object storage technology. Why we'd want to build and deploy something like that is obviously a little bit beyond me, but apparently people do still do that. The interesting thing about that quadrant is everybody's clustered here. Okay, so even the best players in that particular segment mediocre at best. Okay, we're really pushing the art of the possible up here by doing some things that customers find quite valuable. And in reflecting on that, what we hear back from customers is using AWS really does change the way in which they operate. It gives their technologists, their security professionals, their developers some superpowers. And those superpowers take a few different categories. I'm going to talk about 3 of them today. The first is about speed. I think this resonates a little bit with some of the comments that have been made by some of the earlier presenters that have been on stage this morning. What I would say is fully exploiting AWS is about doing the minimum. Okay, so lazy software developers, anyone heard of those? Using platforms, using technology that others have already built, using solutions that have already been created to problems that organizations like yours have already faced. That's a great way to accelerate time to value and get things done more quickly. And at AWS, what we've been focusing on over the course of the last 11 years is creating a broad range of different services, starting with low-level building blocks like virtual machines and the capability to control a programmable network, but moving beyond there into abstracted services that allow you to focus on particular outcomes. It might be business analytics, it might be large-scale data integration and processing, it might be building IoT applications, it might be building and managing mobile apps at really high scale. We have service components that developers can plug in to their architectures, to their application designs that can accelerate the delivery of these outcomes by reducing down the amount that you need to do as technologists, as architects, and as technology leaders. And that's a very important part of maximizing value from the cloud by enabling you to seize this first mover advantage. Obviously, the situation's not static. In 2016, this makes my job difficult, we shipped over 1,017 new services. So that's an average of 2 or 3 every single working day of the year that I have to learn about, and that customers have to learn about. That can be quite challenging, actually. But we continue to move at a pretty rapid pace. And that is not just introducing brand new services. It's also adding additional rich features or adding services that increase the richness of services that already exist. A really good example of that, just last week, we announced general availability of something called the F1 instance family. This is a EC2 instance variant that features a Xilogics FPGA, field programmable gate array, within the hardware. Okay, so the developers can take advantage of FPGA technology. They can write their FPGA image code in a variety of different programming languages. They can flash that down onto the FPGAs in their physical hardware, and they can benefit from a 10 to 100 times performance improvement for running computationally intensive algorithms on silicon, special purpose silicon that's been programmed specifically for the algorithm that the developer wants to run, wants to accelerate, rather than general purpose silicon of the type that you might see from Intel or ARM, of course. So that's just one example of adding feature depth to an existing, very well-established service. And we continue to do that across a lot of other vectors as well. Now, those feature additions don't change the core capabilities of the cloud. And actually, in many ways, they don't change the reasons that customers are so interested in using AWS and other similar platforms. They want to go faster. They want to have the ability to scale elastically up and down. They want to be able to build robust availability strategies by making use of things like multi-region and multi-availability zone deployments, or not. So you can optimize for availability or for cost, depending on what your specific needs are. They want to take advantage of our pace of innovation. And critically, they also want to take advantage of security features that are built into the platform and compliance standards that are built into the platform. If you wind the clock back again a few years, say 3 years, go out and sample a group of technology leaders, ask them why they can't use the cloud or why they haven't done more in the cloud so far, it'd be quite common for them to say security and compliance are areas of concern. Those are inhibitors to organizations doing more with AWS and doing more with the cloud more generally. If you go out and ask the same question today of business leaders, technology leaders that have already been on that journey, that are already making substantial use of AWS and of cloud computing services, they'll often cite information security and compliance as being in the top 3 reasons for moving more quickly, for pushing ahead. So there's been a real change in perspective, a real change in perception about the way in which using the cloud can help you meet security and compliance objectives that you may have. We've heard that here in Europe over the last year or so from customers like PostNL, it's the Dutch equivalent of the Royal Mail, Philips, and a variety of other customers as well. And globally, we've heard it from Capital One and from GE, some of the largest and most well-respected brands, and also some of the largest users of AWS globally. So there's been a real shift in thinking about security and compliance in the cloud. And another area where we've seen a lot of forward motion, a lot of further development, is on really driving hard this idea of abstracting infrastructure. Okay? Particularly important for software developers in wanting to get things done, wanting to create new applications, create new features, or create new services. Who would go first to thinking about what infrastructure they need today? Very, very few people, but a lot of us probably spend a lot of our careers mapping business requirements into infrastructure components. The rise of API-driven infrastructure, the rise of these abstracted services which allow you to focus on specific business outcomes, well, that's allowed us to have the luxury of forgetting about infrastructure to a pretty great extent, correct? It's something that's there, but you can just provision it as you need it. Further continuation down that track has led to the development of this serverless application pattern where not only can your code be executed in response to events on the platform, but there's a broad ecosystem of different event types, different service components that you can integrate together to build rich, highly featured applications with extremely good elasticity and extremely good security characteristics. You can implement a principle of zero trust and a principle of least privilege at the microservice level within the applications that you're building, handing over specific credentials to specific subservices within your app and really minimizing down the attack surface that is available for bad actors that might want to play with the system or attack the system. Okay, so this is something that we've seen a real drive for. We've also seen extensive usage of the same principle to extend AWS capabilities and to build, for example, enhanced security, compliance, and monitoring tools. There's a really interesting project from Capital One, a customer I mentioned a few minutes ago, called Cloud Custodian. They're using a service called AWS Config Rules, which you can see up here. They have an open source extension, a collection of AWS Lambda functions that they've developed. And those Lambda functions allow Capital One and other users of that framework, because it's in the public domain as an open source project, to perform real-time security and compliance monitoring against the state of different AWS resources. Okay, so you can build extensions to AWS using this serverless pattern. We've also taken steps to extend the serverless deployment model and the security controls that are present there into edge devices. So a set of new announcements that we made at AWS reInvent last year. AWS Greengrass, it's an edge computing device for IoT applications, which allows you to build semi or fully autonomous IoT apps, which do not have permanent connectivity to a nearby AWS region. You still manage and control deployment via AWS. You use the same AWS Lambda programming model. It has the same strong encryption and strong identity management capabilities. This can all be managed at the edge of the deployment without requiring a permanent connection to the AWS region that's nearby and that runs our IoT service. And we've got similar features in Snowball Edge and in Lambda Edge for taking the AWS Lambda programming model and deploying that out into the edge computing environment. Lots of customers using this model today, and these use cases are very varied in nature, from automated control of IoT devices in the case of iRobot on their intelligent home automation devices. There's nothing quite as magical as watching your house being cleaned without having to get up out of your chair. I can say as an owner of one of these devices. through to real-time data processing with customers like FINRA. This is the US equivalent of the FCA, the North American financial regulator, using AWS Lambda for data transformation and ingest at high scale as a component of their data management strategy for trade anomaly detection. So we see customers putting these services to work across a broad range of different use cases. Of course, relevant for this audience, another area where you can achieve more in the cloud whilst doing less is in InfoSec. And we continue to make investments in building out the security capabilities of AWS to meet the needs of an increasing range of customers. In fact, information security and related activities, development and operations thereof, that's the largest single area of investment for Amazon Web Services. So we spend more on InfoSec, services, features, and operations than we do on any other collection of services. So it's a super important area for us. And we drive innovation here in the same way that we drive innovation in any other service category that we work upon. So over 95% of our new roadmap items, of our new services and our new features, they come directly from feedback from customers like you, saying to us conversations of this type. AWS, it'd be really helpful if you could make it simpler for us to manage cryptographic materials in the cloud. We want to encrypt our data at rest using symmetric keys to protect it from us and from you and from other bad actors. We need auditing capabilities. We need the capability to create and upload our own keys. We need the capability to manage cryptographic materials from our own applications as well as from your integrated services like data at rest encryption with EBS, for example. And it's these kinds of conversations that lead to the creation of services like KMS, which you can see here, our key management service, which delivers those features that I've just talked about, plus a handful of others as well. So if there is something that you feel we're not doing today, but we should be doing to help you meet your security needs more completely or allow you to offload more of the heavy lifting associated with security operations to us, then do speak to us. Speak to a member of our team. Communicate via Alert Logic. Alert Logic, obviously a very important partner, active in helping us plan and shape our security services roadmaps. But please make sure that you're giving us that feedback. That's what enables us to continue to drive forward the innovations that customers tell us they find so valuable. As I said earlier, our number one area of investment, and it falls into two categories, I would say. So there are security by design features. We have a architecture best practices framework now called the AWS Well-Architected Framework. It's encapsulated in a series of white papers, a series of questionnaires that customers can use to self-assess their architecture against what AWS has developed and identified as global best practice for architecture in the cloud. So you can pick up those assets, those white papers and those questionnaires, and you can use those to assess your posture for security by design. Okay? Building in the right controls, the right security features from day one, and continuously assessing your security posture in AWS against this evolving security benchmark that's encapsulated in the well-architected framework. The other area where customers put AWS security features to work is in response, okay? In response to attacks and in response to threats, and also in response to application and software changes you were talking about a few minutes ago. This is services like Amazon Inspector. It's services like the brand new AWS CodeStar service for automatically building continuous integration and deployment pipelines within AWS, which you can extend with security verification features and automate the process of black flagging software that might have vulnerabilities present within it, which you can detect automatically through a testing cycle. So you can really shift and enhance the level of responsiveness that you have to external threats or to changes that might be introduced into your environment by your own teams. If you're not familiar with those services, they're worth investing a little bit of time in. We did get some feedback over the course of the last few years about DDoS mitigation. Feedback that our posture on DDoS mitigation wasn't clear enough, and we hadn't set out as clearly as we might have done what services we provide in order to help customers mitigate against DDoS attacks. And we announced 2 new services last year to help close that gap for customers. The first is something called AWS Shield. This is a DDoS mitigation service for volumetric and state exhaustion attacks. So we are going to monitor traffic patterns to endpoints that are represented by services such as ELB and CloudFront. We're going to implement mitigation actions in response to these simple attack patterns that you might see targeted against applications or services that you're delivering on those AWS services. And there's an enhanced service tier above that called AWS Shield Advanced, additional protection against very large and sophisticated attacks. It's where AWS is providing response and management services to help you mitigate attacks which might occur in real time and might not fit one of those common attack patterns that I talked about just a moment ago. So if you're interested in these services, again, engage with us, engage with our partners, and learn a little bit more about how you might use them. I want to close up by talking about how we see these trends, the usage of these services affect customers. And we see customers doing a couple of things here. The first is disrupting, Mike's already called out the phrase earlier, reinventing existing industries, breathing new life into new industries. We continue to see customers push the envelope of what is possible in terms of responsiveness, rapid development of services, and global rollout of services and applications. We heard last week at the AWS Summit in San Francisco from Slack about their adoption of AWS and how it's enabled them to build not only one of the world's fastest growing companies in terms of market cap, as well as building one of the world's largest distributed systems. They have over 200 million active users around the world. Every single user maintains a read history for every single channel that they're subscribed to across mobile and desktop clients and web clients. So it's a very sophisticated real-time application that they've built, 100% on AWS. So if you haven't seen that, I'd encourage you to check out our session from the AWS Summit in San Francisco with Slack, where they talk about some of those topics. And then lastly, driving enterprise transformation, so using AWS as a platform to reinvigorate and to rediscover the innovation capability within large enterprises. Many of you will know that I spent the earlier part of my career working in telecoms, and we'd really lost this in telecommunications. We really lost the ability to innovate and create new service offerings for customers. Thankfully, with tools like AWS, and tools that come from AWS partners, many of our customers are rediscovering that capability. And they're rediscovering that capability by doing less counterintuitively and allowing the cloud to carry more of that undifferentiated heavy lifting on their behalf, whether it's deployment, operations, or information security activities. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. That was great. Thank you very much.